A quick note before this episode begins, I want to apologize in advance that the audio quality is not what it normally is. Unfortunately, my microphone is on the verge of dying. I have ordered a new one, so this will only be a temporary issue, but I wanted to let you all know that Friday's episode and potentially Monday's episode, based on when the new microphone arrives, will have some somewhat rough audio, but I wanted to ensure that you guys still get the content that you have come to expect. So, without further ado, here is Friday's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Lavonte David says he still has plenty left in the tank, but it's a business. Where's he going to play next year? That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
Your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Friday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. And, of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho, at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, and just general thoughts, plus one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Head to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to become an insider today. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. We are going to jump into the mailbag coming up in a little bit, but let's start with Lavonte David's appearance on Good Morning Football. So, on Good Morning Football, Jason McCourty asked Lavonte if he was slowing down, looking at retirement, overall what his plan was. And Lavonte said, quote, "I can still play. I feel like I got a lot left in me. I'm going to let my body tell me when it's time to give up and it's time to let it go. But right now I'm feeling pretty good. I got a lot of confidence, especially after the season I just had. I've been hearing a lot of free agent stuff. Like, for a guy like me at my age, I like to hear that. It gives me confidence and keeps me going," end quote. Then Peter Schrager jumped in and said that Lavonte is one of the greatest Buccaneers ever. Can't say that I disagree with that statement from Peter Schrager, but he put him on a list with guys like Derek Brooks, Warren Sapp, John Lynch, Rondé Barber, but pointed out that there has to be an avenue where he retires a Buc, asking if he's spoken to Jason Licht about that. And Lavonte said, quote, "Communications haven't really started up yet, but throughout the season and in exit meetings, we all expressed how we feel about one another, and we would love for me to be back. I would love to be back, but this is my third free agency, and you just never know how things are going to go down and what could happen. There's a lot of mutual respect with me and the Buccaneers organization, but a lot of things have to happen. You just never know. I've said it before. I would love to retire a Buccaneer, like you said, be up there with all those great names, those great guys, but I'm not naive that someone else could come swoop me up. So I'm open to all options, but obviously would love to finish my career in Tampa," end quote. So, first things first, Lavonte is going to have a market out there, even at his age, because the production has never dropped off. So he will have a market of interested teams. This time last week, we were talking about David's appearance on WDAE and how he said it feels like it's the Bucs or retirement, but it may not be that way anymore. He very clearly still has the itch to play. So I don't think retirement is in the cards for Lavonte. He knows he can play, and he can do it at a high level. But in the same way that Jason Licht talked about the Baker Mayfield conversations, and how both sides wanting to reunite is a really good starting point, this is kind of the same way. Now, I'm not going to fault Jason Licht for not getting these talks going quite yet, since he's dealing with the Baker Mayfield and the Mike Evans situations right now, potentially trying to get that stuff done ahead of free agency. But he certainly cannot continue to put this off for much longer. If the negotiating window opens up and Lavonte's agent hears from 3 or 4 teams and they haven't even begun talking to the Buccaneers, Lavonte may go ahead and move on. He's going to feel wanted by those other teams. He's not going to sit around and wait for the Bucs. I talked on this show about how great it would be for Mike Evans to be one of the all-time greats and only ever play for Tampa. You look back and you see Warren Sapp and John Lynch did not play their whole careers in Tampa. Derek Brooks was very unceremoniously dismissed, and he just decided not to continue, although he easily could have. I remember vividly the Chicago Bears being interested in Derek Brooks that season because they were dealing with injuries at the linebacker position. Lovie Smith was the head coach at the time, could have slid right in and fit perfectly into the defense. It would be just as great for Lavonte to play his whole career in Tampa after the Bucs took him in the second round in 2012. But the Bucs can't take him for granted and expect him to wait around on them. He's going to do what's best for him, and if he feels that teams showing interest are better for him rather than waiting around on the Bucs to give him a call, he's going to go. It's like that girl in high school that you know has a crush on you. So you keep going off on dates with other girls knowing that she's going to be sitting around and waiting for you. But then all of a sudden, somebody else shows interest in her and she's not waiting around on you anymore. She has moved on. It's a very, very similar situation. Most of us have gone through that. Maybe the roles were reversed or whatever, but you guys know what I'm talking about. Not only though, would that be a disaster for the Bucs franchise from a PR standpoint and the backlash of fans seeing Lavonte walk? It may not be as big of a backlash as it will be if Mike Evans leaves, but it'll be big nonetheless. And honestly, if Mike leaves because somebody offered him $30 million a year, I think there would be a pretty sizable group of fans that are like, okay, yeah, that sucks that he's gone, but the Bucs weren't going to pay him $30 million. I hope he goes and wins another ring. Best of luck to Mike. But then if Lavonte leaves for $5 or $6 million, there would be rioting, out in front of the Bucs facility. Remember, he played last year on a 1-year, $4.5 million deal, and he had a phenomenal season. He earned himself a raise even at 34 years old. The cost of Lavonte should not be an issue for the Buccaneers, but they can't expect him to sit at home twiddling his thumbs, staring at his phone, waiting for them to call, because other teams absolutely will come calling. If he gets a chance to go play for Kansas City or Detroit or San Francisco or the Bengals or some of these other teams that are constantly in the championship conversation, you think he won't look at going to a contender and think to himself, well, I can keep playing and maybe get another Lombardi, another Super Bowl ring in my career, or I can sit around and wait and stare at my phone waiting for the Bucs to call. It's not going to happen that way. It just won't. If he doesn't feel wanted, despite the exit conversations, despite the in-season conversations, if there's a bunch of teams calling him when this negotiation window opens and the Bucs are not one of them, he may start to feel like it's time to move on. Now, with all of that said, I still believe the likelihood of Lavonte returning is high and the most likely scenario. However, we are less than 2 weeks out from the start of the new league year, and there needs to be at least some preliminary discussion between the Bucs and Lavonte's representation. At least keep him in the loop. Like, look, this is what we have going on, and we're trying to get this worked out right now in this moment. We want Lavonte back. We're going to have a deal put together for him, so don't have him run off and sign with anybody like right out of the gate before we can at least get a chance to match or show him what we're looking at and show him our offer. One way or another, at least open the lines of communication so that March 11th doesn't roll around before you've had a chance to make a phone call, or it could very well bite you in the butt, and that opens a whole new can of worms regarding yet another hole on the Buccaneers roster that would have to be filled. We are going to dive into the mailbag coming up next here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Get buckets on your first bet with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, futures bets, and more. Right now, the Boston Celtics are favorites to win the NBA Finals at plus 260, while defending champion Denver Nuggets are the favorites out of the Western Conference at plus 440. And FanDuel already has odds up for Super Bowl 59, where the San Francisco 49ers are the favorites at plus 500. The Kansas City Chiefs are plus 650 to go ahead and three-peat, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are tied with the New Orleans Saints, Las Vegas Raiders, Arizona Cardinals, and Seattle Seahawks at plus 7,500. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every single day. Every day, just make sure you are coming back on Monday. Going to continue to keep an eye on what's going on in Indianapolis. And of course, it's a mock draft Monday. Meanwhile, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. It is mailbag time, and I'm going to start with a long time everydayer who reached out on Facebook. So Matthew, the seasoned traveler, reached out and asked, who on this list would you like to see the Buccaneers go after in free agency? He has Tyler Biadasz, the center from the Cowboys, offensive tackle Trent Brown of the Patriots, center Lloyd Cushenberry from the Broncos, guard/tackle Robert Hunt of the Dolphins, guard Jonah Jackson of the Lions, guard Damian Lewis of the Seahawks, guard John Runyon from the Packers, offensive tackle Donovan Smith from the Chiefs, offensive tackle Jonah Williams from the Bengals, and guard Kevin Zeitler from the Ravens. If I am the Bucs, first off, it's a hard pass on Donovan Smith. And many of you can attest that David and I, throughout his tenure with the Buccaneers here on this show, were much more kind about Donovan Smith than most anyone else. But still, it was better that they moved on, and their tackles are better now than they were when Smith was here. Outside of that, you're looking at guys that are probably going to eat up way too much money. Robert Hunt from the Dolphins is going to run you about $12 to $13 million. Damian Lewis, you're probably around that $10 million mark. Runyon is probably going to be up there as well. I'll say right out of the gate, I'm not interested in any of the tackles. I think the Bucs are fine with Tristan Wirfs and Luke Gedeke at the tackle positions. That's fine. I would say out of this list, the player I personally would be most interested in is Tyler Biadasz. But even he, I think, is going to be too expensive. If you're looking for an offensive lineman in free agency, you're going to look in the same realm as Matt Filer last year, a lower cost guy that can compete for a starting job, maybe has some versatility, and can rotate between a couple of different positions along that line. But to me, you're looking at the draft if you're going to address the offensive line to get younger and stronger on that left side in between Tristan Wirfs and Robert Hainsey. I do think Hainsey is going to be the starting center again this year. He struggled a little bit more in 2023 than he seemed to in 2022, and maybe some of that had to do with the poor play by Filer and Stinney, and then he had a rookie and Cody Malk on the other side of him. But if the Bucs look to free agency for a lineman, you're probably looking at a depth guy at most. Guys like Connor McGovern, he's coming off of an injury. He's a little bit older. He was under $2 million last year. He brings that veteran leadership to the offensive line that they don't really have beyond Tristan Wirfs, who is still super, super young. Or you have a guy like Dalton Risner, who got the one-year deal in Minnesota last year for only $3 million. He was one of David's favorite players coming out of the draft that year. I remember us speaking to him at the Combine. But he started 10 games and could compete for a starting job. With all the big money that the Buccaneers have to spend elsewhere, I just don't see them going after one of those big-time offensive linemen that you listed. Again, could be wrong. I think the smart money is on them addressing that in the draft. We all know how much Jason Licht loves his day two small school offensive lineman, where you draft, you develop, you bring him up. Cody Mauch seems to be, panning out just fine, and he hit a little bit of a rookie wall, but overall he was really solid. You have Gedeke, who they tried to move inside. He's much better at right tackle. Of course, you have Ali Marpet, who exceeded coming out of a small school there at Hobart up in New York. So I think that's probably the route you're looking for. And if you're looking at free agent offensive linemen, there's a couple that they can bring back, but you're looking for depth, not starters and the money that the starters will cost. Insider Mike asked a little while back. I wasn't able to get to it before, but I thought it was a great question, and it wasn't time sensitive, so I was able to kind of push it off a little bit. But Insider Mike, one of my more active insiders, love chatting with him. He says, so here's a question / scenario to think about. Is it possible that Todd's job is safe as long as there is a revolving door at offensive coordinator? I love that question, but I'm going to say that I don't think that in and of itself keeps Todd Bowles' job safe. It's actually a good thing if your offensive coordinator is getting hired away. That means you're bringing good coaches onto your staff. Losing offensive coordinators year after year is not going to save Todd's job if the team isn't winning and the defense is bleeding points. So he can sit there and say, look, this is our first year offensive coordinator. We struggled a little bit, like they did with Dave Canales. They started off hot, then had a real long stretch where they struggled mightily, picked it up the later half of the year, made the playoff run, and all was fine. But if the defense is bleeding points, the offense is struggling, Todd Bowles can't go into Jason Licht's office and be like, look, I had a new offensive coordinator. What do you want me to do in 1 year? That alone is not going to save his job. If anything, having a revolving door at offensive coordinator points to how good of a job they've done in hiring these guys. As long as the revolving door is moving on to head coaching positions rather than being fired because the offense stinks. See Byron Leftwich. But you go back to that, Byron Leftwich was not Todd Bowles' guy. That was Bruce Arians' guy, and because Arians decided to step down very late in the process, Todd Bowles had to do his first year of coaching in Tampa with Bruce Arians' staff. Then last year, he's able to start building up his own staff, brings in Dave Canales. Dave Canales gets plucked for a head coaching job. That's a sign that the Bucs hired a good offensive coordinator. You don't give bad coordinators head coaching opportunities. So if Liam Cohen is one and done because he gets plucked away and he's coaching the Arizona Cardinals next year, or he's coaching, maybe Alabama is in a situation where they're one and done, he goes back to the college ranks to go to the SEC and face Kentucky, who he has ditched twice now. But if these guys are getting head coaching positions, that points to the fact that you are seeing something in these guys and they are climbing the ranks and you're doing a good job in your process of hiring coaches. It's not quite the same thing as when a head coach gets a rookie quarterback and you're supposed to have that wiggle room where it's like, look, a lot of head coaches seem to get at least 2 years when a rookie quarterback is drafted and starts. You have that first year learning curve where the rookie is getting acclimated to the NFL game. Then you want to see growth and improvement both in the quarterback and in the win-loss column. That second year If that happens, the head coach seems to continue to keep their job. If that doesn't happen, the head coach is fired, somebody else is brought in. That's the way it generally is supposed to work. Just not if you're the Carolina Panthers and you do everything the wrong way because your owner is an incompetent potato. So it's not the same for coordinators as it is for quarterbacks, at least not in the eyes of general managers and, of course, ownership. But for every offensive coordinator that gets plucked away from the Bucs, that's another feather in the hat of Todd Bowles. But again, if a offensive coordinator gets pulled away, they hire a new one, that new one struggles, it's not going to protect Todd Bowles' job the following season. There are just too many factors that are built into those kinds of decisions that it doesn't carry the same weight as maybe a rookie quarterback would. Finishing up the mailbag before we send you into the weekend, that is coming up next here on Locked On Bucs.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. I know in my life, I am constantly running around figuring out how I'm going to get my son to this tournament or that game while juggling my jobs as well as the financial aspect. But when all is said and done, I know that that's going to be what I look back on most fondly in my life. However, that doesn't alleviate the stress that it causes in the short term. Speaking to someone who is unbiased can give me an outsider's point of view and helps me compartmentalize the stresses I'm feeling while helping me see the bigger picture. And sometimes it's best to have that person to help you keep perspective. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
Wrapping things up here on a Friday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast, and a couple of more mailbag questions to send you into the weekend. Insider David sent this one just in time. I was literally working on the episode. I get the text from Insider David, and I let him know. I was like, you barely got this in under the wire. But he said, should the Bucs look for an under-the-radar tight end in free agency or stick with Cade, Coe, and Payne? If we look to the draft, Cade will be our most experienced tight end going into year 3. I don't hate the idea of looking for a tight end in free agency, but I think the Bucs end up rolling with what they have. Now, Liam Cohen might see things differently and decide that Keefe doesn't fit what he wants to do, or that Payne Durham isn't the kind of tight end that he wants to utilize. But I think we've seen enough from Cade Otton to slot him in at tight end 1. Durham did start to get some opportunities late in the season and into the playoffs, so it seems like he's kind of trending up. And then Coe is Coe. Like, he's not a pass catcher, he's the blocker, but it sure does make it fun when he catches a pass or two or gets into the end zone like he did last year. If the Bucs are going to dip into the free agent well for potential depth, or, as you pointed out, kind of veteran leadership at tight end, and get someone on the cheap, I would look to players like Brock Wright, who was very overshadowed in Detroit. Not his fault. Sam Laporta is an absolute monster. Looks like one of the biggest steals of the draft. You have Bryson Hopkins, who played for Cohen in Los Angeles. That might be a guy that he wants to bring in. Or maybe even Adam Troutman. And maybe this is my own personal bias, just because he was one of my favorite players when he came into the draft, and I was devastated that a guy from my backyard at the University of Dayton, who, I think he might be the first University of Dayton player ever drafted to the NFL, ended up playing for the New Orleans Saints, but he didn't get a ton of opportunity with the Saints. He followed Sean Payton to Denver. Again, was kind of a very limited use kind of player, but he is a guy that can catch passes and can block and do it on the cheap. So those would be the kind of names that I would look for. You know, they're not going to go after a Jonnu Smith or, you know, any of those big name guys, because I think Otten is your tight end one. But it wouldn't surprise me if they brought in some veteran leadership. But I do think that, you know, Bryson Hopkins, having played for Cohen in Los Angeles, they're running a similar system to what McVay does because that's where, you know, Cohen worked. He would kind of fit in pretty well and actually be able to bring some of these guys along. But if I remember correctly, and I haven't done a deep dive on this, I don't remember the Rams utilizing the tight end very much, even when Cohen was there. Maybe it's because they always had such great wide receivers and running backs, but it didn't really seem like, I mean, Tyler Higbee had kind of like one really impressive season, but other than that, it didn't seem like that was a big part of their offensive philosophy. Maybe the tight end won't be used very much in Tampa. I hope that's not the case because they have some talented ones, but that may be kind of a secondary thought for Cohen. I think it's more important that they get running backs that can both run the ball and catch passes, and then, of course, lock in Mike Evans. Then you have Evans and Godwin and Palmer, and you're kind of set there. A wide receiver. Do probably still need a wide receiver 3. That's probably a day 3 pick, depending on how free agency goes. But we'll dive into that a little bit more. Speaking of the draft, Insider Scotty says, with Devin White gone, what about Lavonte David? Is linebacker a big need? Our offensive line looks kind of set. Linebacker, corner, or edge, I'm looking best available, and it may come down to the center/interior offensive line, cornerback, or linebacker. Do they pursue edge rusher in free agency or draft and hope for the best? If free agency, then what is the next biggest need? So a lot to unpack here. Inside linebacker is not going to be a big need if Lavonte David returns. I talked about that earlier on this very show. As you know, it still seems to me that is going to be the most likely outcome. So if Lavonte David comes back, then you still have KJ Brent, you have Servassier Dennis, JJ Russell is a free agent, but again, I think you get him back pretty easily and pretty inexpensively. So pending Lavonte's decision, I would not put linebacker in the top 5 needs of this team by any stretch. It may not be top 7. If you're going to go best player available at a position of need at pick 26, you're looking for edge rusher, guard, safety, potentially corner. I would throw running back in there. You guys know how I feel about the running back position, but I cannot justify this team spending a first-round pick on a running back. So I'm not going to include that as a potential best player available at 26 situation. If you are going, I'm sorry, Evan and I talked about edge rusher on Thursday's episode, and maybe they go look for a Shaq Barrett-like player that didn't get a lot of opportunity with his former team, and they can catch lightning in a bottle twice. But your best bet is going to be draft one, especially if Jared Verse, Chop Robinson, Latu are sitting there and they come to you at 26. Or Evan even mentioned maybe this is one of the rare occasions where Jason Licht moves up to make sure that they get the guy that they want and the guy that they believe can be a game changer for the defense. Jason Licht does not move up often in that first round. In fact, he tends to move back a little bit more. But you saw him move up to make sure that they got Tristan Wirfs, and that seems to have worked out pretty well. If they go the free agent route for edge rusher, I would say the next biggest need I would put emphasis on is guard. They don't have a starting left guard right now. Filer and Stinney are both free agents, and I would love to see the Bucs get Aaron Stinney back as a depth guy, but I think last year kind of showed that he is not a full-time starter, so it's really important that they address that position. Again, they could draft or sign a center and then move Hainsey over to guard, which is where he played for Notre Dame. but I get the feeling that Hainsey is going to be the guy that stays in the middle, and they're going to look for someone to put in between him and Wirfs. With that said, if they do move on from Carlton Davis, and I've talked on this show a couple of times about how he's one of the players that I'm looking at as a potential casualty, get out from his contract. You have Zion McCollum there that can step in and play corner, or you could potentially draft a cornerback 1 at 26. I have seen mock drafts where the Bucs get Kool-Aid McKinstry. I have seen them in mock drafts get Enos Rakestraw. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but you guys know I'm talking about. He's the corner out of Missouri. Or you have the guy out of Toledo in Quinion Mitchell. These are guys that could potentially fall to the Bucs. I personally would prefer McKinstry or Mitchell if that would allow Todd Bowles to go back to more man coverage. Rakestraw tends to be a more off coverage guy. He's better in zone. He's not really a press man kind of corner. But that's why so many Bucs fans like Kool-Aid McKinstry so much. He's big, he's lengthy, he's fast, and he excels in press man coverage. He is a potential cornerback 1 for this team or for any team that he gets drafted to. And that opportunity might be too good to pass on. I do, if I remember correctly, it might have been Insider Mike that asked about if there would be any kind of frustration or bad blood maybe if the Bucs move on from Carlton Davis on the part of Jamel Dean, that was his teammate at Auburn and now he's moving on. I don't think it would get to that point at all. This is a business. They know it's a business. These guys see their friends and their buddies move from team to team all the time. So I don't think that would add any frustration or bitterness from Jamel Dean to the Buccaneers franchise. He understands that he may be in the situation the very next year. The Bucs have an out in Jamel Dean's contract after next season that they may utilize if he struggles the way he did in 2023, both on the field and with injuries. But that is going to do it for this episode. Please check out everything going on over at bucksnation.com. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube and your podcatcher of choice. Follow along on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. If you want to become an insider, go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to sign up. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.